I was sitting in the living room of my small house when the phone rang. It was an unknown number, but something inside me told me I had to answer. On the other end, a cold, professional voice asked if I was Margaret Sullivan. I confirmed with a lump in my throat. The woman from the bank informed me that my name was in the system for delinquent debtors and that I had an overdue auto loan for $42,000. I felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath my feet. I had never bought a car. I had never signed any contract. My hands began to shake as I held the phone. The bank employee continued explaining that the installments had gone unpaid for 3 months and that they were already initiating legal proceedings against me. My voice barely came out when I told her there must be a mistake, that I had not authorized any of that. She replied in a softer tone that she regretted the situation, but that all the documents were in order, with my signature and my social security number. I hung up the phone and stared at the wall, feeling my heart beating so hard it seemed like it would burst out of my chest. I could not understand what was happening. At 64 years old, I had worked all my life to keep my credit score clean. I never owed a cent to anyone. I always paid everything on time, with my hard-earned money. And now they were telling me I owed $42,000 for a car I did not even know existed. I needed answers. I called the bank back and asked to speak with someone who could give me more information. After 30 minutes of holding and being transferred from one department to another, a supervisor finally attended to me. I explained the whole situation with a breaking voice. He reviewed the file and told me something that made my blood run cold. The financing had been requested by my son, Mason. My own son had used my documents, forged my signature, and bought a car in my name. The supervisor read me the delivery address for the vehicle. It was Mason's house. He read me the model of the car, a luxury SUV, the latest model, bright red. I cut the call without even saying goodbye. Tears began to roll down my cheeks while my mind tried to process what I had just heard. My son, the boy I raised alone after becoming a widow, the young man to whom I gave everything I could, and much more. Mason had betrayed me in the cruelest way possible. I grabbed my purse with trembling hands and ran out to my car. I needed to see him. I needed to hear him tell me to my face that this was a terrible mistake. I drove the 20 minutes to his house with a racing heart and a mind full of contradictory thoughts. Maybe someone had stolen his identity too. Maybe he knew nothing. Maybe there was an explanation. When I arrived, I saw the car. That damn red SUV parked in his driveway, shining under the sun as if mocking me. My legs were shaking as I walked toward the front door. I rang the doorbell once, twice, 3 times. Finally, the door opened. It was Tiffany, Mason's wife. She looked at me with that expression she always had, as if I were a nuisance in her perfect life. She did not even say hello. She just stepped aside and yelled inside that I had arrived. Her tone made it clear that my visit was not welcome. Mason appeared in the living room with a beer in his hand. He looked at me without surprise, as if he already knew why I was there. My voice came out stronger than I expected when I asked him about the financing, about the car, about my name on a debt I never authorized. He shrugged. Just like that, as if it were nothing, as if we were talking about the weather. He told me yes, that he had financed the car in my name because Tiffany needed a new vehicle and they did not have available credit. He said I should understand, that she was my daughter-in-law and deserved something nice. I felt my blood boiling. I asked him how he dared to do that without my permission, without even consulting me. He let out a short, bitter laugh. He told me that I was not using my credit for anything anyway, that he just took advantage of something I had available, that I should be happy to be able to help my family. Tiffany intervened from the couch, where she was looking at her phone without paying attention to me. She said, I had always been a present mother, and now it was time to prove that love by paying the car installments, that they were going through a difficult time financially, and that I, as the grandmother of their children, should support them. I could not believe what I was hearing. I told them the bank was suing me, that my credit was ruined, that I did not have that money. Mason replied coldly that I needed to get it then, because if I did not pay, the problem was mine, not theirs. He said the car was already in my name on the papers and that legally I was the responsible party. I tried to make him listen to reason. I reminded him of everything I had done for him, how I worked 3 jobs simultaneously when he was a child to give him an education, how I paid for his entire college tuition, how I helped him when he got married, when his first child was born, when he needed money for the down payment on his house. I reminded him of every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every meal I skipped so he could have a full plate. He looked at me with indifference and told me that was what mothers did, that it was my obligation to have raised him, that he did not ask to be born and that I chose to have him, so I should not charge him anything now. His words were like daggers straight to the heart. Tiffany got up from the couch and approached me. She told me I was being dramatic, that I was blowing everything out of proportion, that the car cost only $800 a month, and that with my Social Security check I could pay it perfectly, that I should stop playing the victim and think about my grandchildren, who deserved to have a mother who came to pick them up in a decent car. I stared at her. That woman I welcomed into my family with open arms, the one I helped when she got pregnant and did not even have money for medical checkups, the one for whom I paid for the baby shower, the baby clothes, the diapers for months. That same woman was now demanding I pay for her luxury car while treating me as if I were a burden. I left that house without saying another word. There was nothing I could say to them that would make a difference. They had already decided that I was their source of money, their solution to all their financial problems. And the worst part was realizing that this had not been a mistake. It had been planned. It had been intentional. I drove back to my house with tears blurring my vision. I had to pull over twice on the way because I could not see well. When I finally arrived, I sat in my car for almost an hour, simply crying. Crying for the betrayal. Crying for the ingratitude. Crying because the son I loved more than my own life had used me as if I were worth nothing. That night I could not sleep. I sat in the kitchen, staring at the walls, trying to understand how I had reached this point. How my own son had become someone so cruel, so selfish. The hours passed slowly while my mind went over every moment, every sacrifice I had made for him. The next morning, I decided to check my bank accounts. Something told me the car was not the only thing. I opened my laptop with trembling hands and logged into my account. What I saw knocked the wind out of me. My savings account, where I kept my emergency fund, was almost empty. I had had $12,000 saved. Money I had gathered over years, penny by penny. Now only $300 remained. I stared at the screen without being able to blink, feeling the world crumbling around me. I checked the transaction history. There were constant withdrawals over the last 6 months, amounts of $500, $700, $1,000, all made at ATMs near Mason's house, all made with my debit card, the card I kept in my wallet and had never lent to anyone. But then I remembered something. A year ago, Mason asked to borrow my card because he said he needed to make an urgent deposit into my account. I gave it to him without thinking twice. He was my son. I trusted him. He returned it to me that same day. I never suspected he had made a copy. I never imagined he had discovered my PIN by watching me when I used it. I kept checking. I opened my email inbox and searched for messages from the bank that I might have ignored. I found dozens of notifications I had overlooked, thinking they were just junk mail. But they were not. They were alerts for requested loans, for open lines of credit, for suspicious movements. My heart beat faster and faster. I logged into my personal credit report portal. Everything was there. Besides the financing for the car for $42,000, there were 3 more personal loans. One for $8,000, another for $5,000, and one more for $12,000, all approved in my name, all with my supposed signature, all delivered to an account that was not mine. I did the math with shaking hands. In total, I owed $67,000, money I never saw, money my son had stolen from me using my identity, my trust, my mother's love. I got up from the chair, feeling my legs could not support me. I walked to the bathroom and threw up. The shock was so great my body could not process it. I sat on the bathroom floor for I do not know how long, hugging my knees, feeling my whole life falling apart. When I managed to stand up, I washed my face and returned to the computer. I needed to know more. I logged into my credit card company account. I had forgotten I had a credit card I barely used with a $10,000 limit the bank had offered me years ago. The card was maxed out, $10,000 spent. I checked the transactions and felt rage beginning to replace the pain. purchases at luxury clothing stores, expensive restaurants, a jewelry store, an electronics store, everything near Mason's house. Everything in the last 4 months. Tiffany. She had been using my credit card as if it were hers, buying whatever she pleased while I lived on the minimum, watching every cent of my pension. I printed all the documents, every statement, every transaction, every loan. I organized them in a folder while tears fell on the papers. This was the proof of the biggest betrayal of my life, the proof that my son and his wife had been stealing from me systematically for months. I picked up the phone and called Mason. I needed to hear his voice. I needed him to tell me there was an explanation. He answered on the 4th ring, with an annoyed voice, asking me what I wanted now. I told him what I had discovered. The loans, the withdrawals, the credit card, everything. I expected him to at least be surprised, to deny something, but he did not. There was only silence on the other end of the line. Finally, he spoke. He told me I owed it to him, that he had calculated all the money I owed him for bringing him into the world without his consent, that every penny he had taken was part of what I owed him for forcing him to exist. His words were so cold, so calculated, they did not seem to come from my son. I asked him how he could say that, how he could justify stealing everything I had. He laughed, a bitter laugh that pierced my soul. He told me I was a dramatic old woman, that he was not stealing anything because everything I had should be his anyway, that when I died, he would inherit it, so he was just advancing the inevitable. Tiffany took the phone. She told me to stop bothering her husband, that he was very stressed because of me, that if I had been a better mother and given them money when they needed it, they would not have had to take these measures. She blamed me for their theft. She made me responsible for their lack of morals. I told her I was going to report them, that they were not going to get away with it. She laughed and told me to try, that they had all the documents with my signature, that before the law I had authorized everything, that no one was going to believe me, that my own son had robbed me, that I would just look like a crazy old woman trying to take money away from her family. I hung up the phone before she could keep talking. My hands were shaking with rage. But there was something more than rage. There was determination. They thought I was weak, that I was an easy victim. They thought they could destroy me and that I would simply accept it in silence. They were wrong. I sat back in front of the computer and began to research. I looked for information on identity fraud, document forgery, theft by family members. I read for hours. I took notes. I learned about my rights, about the laws, about the legal processes I could initiate. It was 3 a.m. when I finally closed the computer. I had a plan. It would not be easy, but I had to do it. Not just for me, but for any other mother being abused by her own children. I had to prove that a mother's love did not mean being a bottomless bank. That family was no excuse for abuse. The next morning, I heard a knock on my door. It was Barbara, my neighbor of a lifetime. She had noticed my car had been parked all day yesterday and got worried. When I opened the door, she must have seen my state because she immediately hugged me. I told her everything, every detail of the betrayal, every lie, every theft. I cried in her arms like I had not cried in years. Barbara listened in silence, stroking my hair as if I were her own daughter. When I finished speaking, she looked me straight in the eyes. She told me she knew a lawyer. Arthur was his name, an honest man who had helped her sister in a similar case. She told me I could not let Mason and Tiffany get away with it, that I deserved justice, that I deserved to get my life back. Barbara insisted on accompanying me to see the lawyer. That same afternoon, we were sitting in a small office downtown. Arthur was a man of about 50, with gray hair and a kind but serious look. He offered me coffee and sat across from me with a notebook in hand. I told him the whole story from the beginning. I did not omit any detail. I showed him all the documents I had printed, the bank statements, the suspicious transactions, everything. He listened attentively, taking notes, stopping occasionally to ask specific questions. When I finished speaking, Arthur put his pen down on the desk and looked at me with an expression mixing indignation and determination. He told me that what Mason and Tiffany had done was a serious felony. Fraud, document forgery, identity theft, embezzlement. The words sounded so serious, so definitive. He explained that the process would not be quick or easy, that we would have to prove I had not authorized any of those transactions, that we would need solid evidence. But he assured me we had a strong case and that he would do everything possible to help me. I asked him with a trembling voice how much all this would cost me. I had no money. My account was empty. I was in debt up to my neck because of my son. Arthur smiled sadly and told me we would work with a payment plan. That the important thing now was to stop the bleeding and recover what we could. We left that office with a clear plan. First, we were going to request security footage from all the banks where the suspicious transactions had been made. Second, we would file a formal fraud report with the authorities. Third, we would request a protective order to prevent Mason and Tiffany from accessing anything related to me. Barbara held my hand while we walked to the car. She told me I was brave, that I was doing the right thing. But I did not feel brave. I felt destroyed. I felt like a mother who had failed to raise a good man. I felt guilty for having to report my own son. That night, alone in my house, I began to remember. I could not help it. The memories came like waves, one after another, hitting me without mercy. I remembered when Mason was 8 years old and got gravely ill. We spent 3 weeks in the hospital. I slept in a chair next to his bed, without moving, watching every breath. I took out loans to pay for the treatment. I went into debt up to my ears. But I saved him. I did what any mother would do for her child. I remembered his high school graduation, how his eyes shone when he received his diploma, how he hugged me and told me everything was thanks to me, that I was the best mother in the world. I cried with happiness that day. I thought all the sacrifice had been worth it. I remembered when he met Tiffany. He was so in love, so hopeful. I had my reservations about her from the beginning, something in her gaze I did not like. But I kept silent. I did not want to be that meddling mother-in-law. I wanted my son to be happy, so I welcomed her with open arms. I gave her my affection. I treated her like a daughter. I remembered when my first grandson was born. Mason called me crying with emotion to tell me I was a grandma. I ran to the hospital. I saw that tiny baby and felt my heart expand. I thought this would unite us more as a family. I never imagined that years later, that same son would use my grandchildren as an excuse to justify robbing me. I cried all night, hugging an old photo of Mason when he was a boy. That sweet boy who hugged me before sleeping. That boy who told me that when he grew up he was going to take care of me. Where had that boy gone? At what moment did he become this man who saw me as an ATM? The next morning, Arthur called me. He had obtained something important. The banks had agreed to hand over the security footage. He asked me to go to his office immediately. Barbara accompanied me again. When we arrived, Arthur had his laptop open on the desk. I sat down, and he began to play the videos. I felt my stomach turning with every image. There was Mason. In the first video, entering the bank with my ID in hand, approaching the teller with a confident smile, handing over documents, signing papers. The executive reviewed everything and nodded. My son was forging my signature in front of the cameras, acting as if it were the most normal thing in the world. The second video was even worse. There was Tiffany at another bank, using my credit card to withdraw cash up to the maximum limit allowed, $8,000 in cash. The teller counted the bills while Tiffany smiled, putting the money in her designer purse, probably also bought with my money. The third video broke me completely. It was Mason again, this time at the car dealership. He was signing the financing contract for the SUV. Tiffany was by his side, excited, pointing at the red car. The two were laughing, celebrating. The salesman handed them the keys. My son hugged his wife while I, unknowingly, had just become a debtor of $42,000. Arthur paused the videos and looked at me. He asked if I was ready to move forward, if I was sure I wanted to do this. Because once we filed the formal complaint, there would be no turning back. My son would face criminal charges. He could go to prison. I looked at those frozen images on the screen, the image of my son smiling while robbing me, the image of that woman enjoying my money without any remorse, and something inside me changed. The pain turned into determination. The sadness turned into strength. I told Arthur yes, to file all necessary complaints, to do whatever he had to do. that I was no longer the mother who was going to allow more abuse, that if my son decided to betray me this way, then he would have to face the consequences of his actions. That afternoon, we went to the district attorney's office together. We filed a formal complaint for fraud, document forgery, identity theft, and embezzlement. The prosecutor who attended to us reviewed all the evidence with attention. The videos were conclusive. There was no way to deny what had happened. She asked if I was aware that this meant my son would be investigated criminally, that if everything I alleged was proven, he could face several years in prison. I felt a lump in my throat, but I nodded. There was no other option. He had crossed a line from which there was no return. The prosecutor assured me they would take the case seriously, that cases of financial abuse by family members were more common than people thought, but few victims dared to report it. She told me I was doing the right thing, that I was protecting not only my future, but also sending a clear message that this type of abuse was not acceptable. We left the prosecutor's office with a copy of the official report. Barbara hugged me in the parking lot. She told me she was proud of me, that I was stronger than I believed. Her words gave me a little comfort amidst all the pain. That night, Arthur called me with more news. He had continued investigating on his own and discovered something else. Mason had been receiving the rental money from a small condo I owned. That condo was my only source of additional income besides my Social Security. I could not believe what Arthur was telling me over the phone. The condo I rented generated $500 a month, money that supposedly my son deposited into my account every month, since he had offered to manage that property to make my life easier. I trusted him completely. But according to Arthur's investigation, those deposits never reached my account during the last 8 months. $4,000 that simply disappeared. Mason had been collecting the rent in my name and keeping every cent. The tenant paid punctually, but the money went straight into my son's pocket. I felt rage rising up my chest like boiling lava. It was not enough to have stolen my savings, to have forged loans, to have used my cards. He was also stealing the only extra income I had to survive. Every month, while I counted pennies to buy food, he spent my rental money on who knows what whims. Arthur explained that this was another charge we could add to the complaint: misappropriation of funds. He told me the next day we would go speak directly with the tenant to get his testimony and payment receipts. We needed proof that the money had been paid but never reached me. That night I did not sleep at all. My mind would not stop spinning. I started wondering what else there could be. What other lies? What other thefts? If Mason had been capable of doing all this, what else was he hiding? The next morning, Arthur picked me up early. We went together to the condo I rented. It was half an hour from my house, in a quiet neighborhood. The tenant was an older gentleman named Mr. Henderson, a hard-working and honest man who had always paid on time. When I explained the situation, Mr. Henderson turned pale. He showed me all his payment receipts. Indeed, he had paid religiously every month. $500 in cash directly to Mason, who gave him a handwritten receipt. Mr. Henderson never suspected anything because my son always told him he was the one managing the property for me. Mr. Henderson apologized repeatedly, although he was not to blame at all. He told me if he had known I was not receiving the money, he would have come directly to find me. I assured him he had done nothing wrong, that the victim was not just me but also him, who trusted he was fulfilling his obligation. Arthur took photographs of all the receipts, each one signed by Mason, each one with his clearly recognizable handwriting. This was irrefutable evidence that my son had been systematically diverting the money that belonged to me. Back in the car, Arthur told me something that froze me. He asked if Mason had access to anything else of mine: properties, investments, accounts. I told him no, just that condo. But then I remembered something that made me feel a void in my stomach. 2 years ago, when my husband died, he left a small life insurance policy, $50,000. I invested that money in a fund that gave me monthly interest. It was not much, but it helped. Mason had convinced me that he could handle that investment better than I could, that he understood more about finances. As always, I trusted my son. I asked Arthur to investigate that investment immediately. He made some calls from the car, while I felt panic growing inside me. After 20 minutes that felt like hours, Arthur hung up the phone and looked at me with a grave expression. The investment had been liquidated 6 months ago. The $50,000 had been transferred to a bank account, but it was not my account. It was an account in Mason's name. My son had forged my authorization to liquidate the investment and transfer all the money to his name. I was left speechless, breathless. $50,000. The last memory of my husband. The money that was going to secure my old age. The fund that gave me peace of mind in case of emergencies. Everything had been stolen by my own son. Arthur grabbed my hand as I started to hyperventilate. He told me to breathe, that everything was going to be okay, that we were going to recover that money. But I could not calm down. It was too much. It was too much betrayal, too much cruelty, too much pain. We arrived at his office, and he made me tea while I tried to process everything. He made more calls, requested more documents, added more charges to the complaint. The list of crimes committed by Mason grew with every passing hour. While we waited for answers, I began to remember signs I had ignored. Strange conversations, moments when Mason had asked me to sign papers, unimportant ones. Occasions when he had told me not to worry about checking statements because he had already done it for me. Everything had been part of a calculated plan to rob me of everything I had. I remembered once, a year ago, when Tiffany had casually told me I was a lucky woman to have so much money saved. At that moment, I did not give importance to the comment, but now I realized she already knew exactly how much money I had. They were already planning how to take it from me. Arthur's phone rang. It was the investment company. They confirmed that indeed the liquidation had been processed with documents that seemed to be in order. But now, with our report, they were reviewing the authenticity of the signatures. The representative told Arthur that the signatures looked suspicious when compared to my real signature in their old files. This meant we could prove that Mason had forged my signature again, that he had committed fraud on a much larger scale than we imagined. Arthur explained that this significantly raised the severity of the charges. We were no longer talking just about some loans. We were talking about massive, systematic fraud planned for years. That afternoon, while going back home with Barbara, she asked me how I felt. I told her the truth. I felt empty. I felt as if I had lost my son a long time ago and was just realizing it. The Mason I knew, the boy I raised, had died. In his place was a stranger, a criminal, someone capable of destroying his own mother without blinking. Barbara hugged me and cried with me. She told me I had the right to feel pain, to feel rage, to feel betrayal, but that I also had the right to defend myself, that I was not a bad mother for protecting myself. That love did not mean allowing abuse. That night, Mason called me. His number appeared on my phone, and I felt my heart racing. I hesitated to answer, but finally, I did. I needed to hear what he had to say. His voice sounded annoyed, almost angry. He told me he had received a summons from the district attorney's office, that I had reported him, that how did I dare do that to my own son. There were no apologies. There was no regret, only indignation, because I had dared to defend myself. I told him with a firm voice that he had stolen everything from me, my savings, my inheritance, my peace of mind, my future, that he had forged documents, he had committed fraud, he had destroyed my name, and that now he was going to face the consequences of his actions. Mason laughed sarcastically. He told me I had no proof of anything, that he had been careful, that all documents had my signature, and that before any judge, it would look like I had authorized everything. He told me I was just making a fool of myself, and the only thing I would achieve was looking like a crazy old woman accusing her son for no reason. I replied that I had all the necessary proof, the security videos from the banks, the testimonies of employees, the expert analysis of forged signatures, the rental receipts, everything. There was silence on the other end of the line, a long and tense silence. Finally, Mason spoke. But this time his voice was different. He no longer sounded confident or mocking. He sounded nervous. He asked me what videos, what proof. I told him he knew perfectly well what I was talking about, that they had filmed him at the banks forging my signature, that we had recordings of Tiffany withdrawing thousands of dollars with my card, that every fraudulent movement was documented. I heard him breathing heavily on the other end. Then his tone changed completely. He started saying everything had been a misunderstanding, that he thought I had given him permission, that maybe he had misinterpreted our conversations, that he never wanted to hurt me. The lies came out of his mouth with such ease it disgusted me. I told him to stop pretending, that I knew exactly what he had done and why he had done it, that he had planned every theft, every forgery, every deception, that there was no confusion or misunderstanding, there was only deliberate betrayal. Tiffany took the phone. She was screaming. She called me a bitter old woman, selfish, bad mother, said I was destroying my own family for money, that my grandchildren would suffer because of me, that if Mason went to prison, I would never see those children again. She was using my grandchildren as a weapon, as emotional blackmail. I replied with a calm I did not know I had. I told her she had destroyed this family when she decided to manipulate my son to rob me, that if my grandchildren suffered, it was because of their parents' decisions, not mine, that I had tried to build a healthy family, but they had poisoned it with their greed. She kept shouting insults, but I hung up. I had nothing more to discuss with that woman. I had nothing more to discuss with either of them. Now I only had to wait for justice to do its job. The following days were a storm of legal activity. Arthur worked tirelessly. We filed requests with all banks to freeze Mason and Tiffany's accounts until the case was resolved. We requested the preventive seizure of the red SUV. We asked for a restraining order so neither of them could approach me or my properties. The prosecutor assigned to the case was a woman named D.A. Harper. She was about 40 years old and had a penetrating gaze that inspired confidence. She summoned me to her office to review the whole case in detail. We spent 3 hours going over every document, every piece of evidence, every testimony. D.A. Harper told me something I will never forget. She told me that in her 20 years as a prosecutor, she had seen dozens of cases like mine. Children abusing elderly parents, relatives stealing inheritances, spouses emptying accounts, but that very few victims dared to report, that the majority preferred to suffer in silence out of fear, shame, or a misplaced sense of family loyalty. She told me I was doing something important, that my case could set a precedent, that it could help other people in similar situations find the courage to defend themselves. Her words gave me strength I did not know I needed. D.A. Harper explained the process ahead. First, they would summon Mason and Tiffany for formal questioning. They would show them the evidence. They would give them the opportunity to confess or hire their own lawyers. Depending on their answers, the case could go to trial or they could accept a deal. She asked me what I wanted to happen. If I sought only to recover my money, or if I wanted them to face full criminal charges. I looked her straight in the eyes and told her I wanted both. I wanted my money back, but I also wanted them to pay for what they did. I wanted them to understand that their actions had consequences. A week later, Arthur called me excited. The bank had seized the red SUV. The police had gone to Mason's house with a court order and taken the car away. Tiffany had come out screaming into the street, making a scene in front of all the neighbors. But there was nothing she could do. The vehicle would be auctioned, and the money would go to pay part of the debt they had generated in my name. I felt relieved, but also strange. Seeing my son suffer consequences broke my heart, even knowing it was necessary. It was as if two parts of me were in constant war. The mother who wanted to protect her son, and the woman who needed to protect herself. Barbara kept visiting me every day. She brought food, sat with me, listened when I needed to talk. One day she told me she had heard other neighbors commenting on my situation. At first, I got scared, thinking they would judge me. But Barbara told me it was quite the opposite. The neighbors admired my courage. Some even confessed they had lived through similar situations but never dared to do anything. One of them, a lady named Dorothy, came to visit me one afternoon. She told me through tears how her son had stolen $25,000 from her retirement account and she never reported him. She lived with that burden of pain and resentment for 5 years. I told Dorothy it was never too late to seek justice, that she also deserved to be defended. I gave her Arthur's number. I do not know if she finally called him, but I hope so. No one should live being a victim of their own family. 2 weeks after the complaint, the official summons for Mason and Tiffany arrived. They had to present themselves at the DA's office for formal questioning. Arthur told me it was likely they would bring a lawyer, that they would prepare to defend themselves, that this was going to get more complicated. The day of the interrogation, I did not have to be present, but Arthur called me that afternoon to tell me what had happened. Mason and Tiffany had arrived with an expensive lawyer, one of those who charge $300 an hour. The lawyer had tried to argue that everything had been a family misunderstanding, that I had given them verbal permission to use my credit. But when DA Harper showed them the security videos, the expert analysis of forged signatures, the bank testimonies, everything collapsed. The lawyer asked for a recess to speak with his clients. When they returned, their strategy had changed. Now they alleged that Mason had serious financial problems and that he had acted out of desperation, not malice. DA Harper did not accept those excuses. She showed them the evidence of the $50,000 from the liquidated investment. She showed them the receipts of the diverted rent for 8 months. She showed them the luxury purchases on the credit cards. This was not desperation. This was systematic greed. The lawyer finally asked to negotiate a plea deal. He proposed that Mason and Tiffany return all the stolen money within 2 years in exchange for dropping criminal charges. DA Harper told them that proposal would have to come from me, that I was the victim, and I decided. Arthur asked me what I wanted to do. He explained the options. If I accepted the agreement, I would recover my money faster and avoid a long and painful trial. But Mason and Tiffany would not have criminal records and basically would go free. If I rejected the agreement, the case would go to trial. They could face prison, but the process would be long, stressful, and there was no guarantee I would recover my money soon. I asked for time to think. That night I did not sleep. I thought about my grandchildren, about how this would affect them. I thought about Mason, about the boy he was, about the man he turned into. I thought about my future, my stability, my dignity. The next morning, I called Arthur and gave him my answer. I would not accept the agreement, not while they continued without showing a shred of real remorse, not while they continued treating me as if I were the guilty one. I wanted the case to move forward. I wanted them to face all the consequences of their actions. Arthur respected my decision and communicated it to DA Harper. The prosecutor called me personally to tell me she understood my stance and would do everything possible to achieve justice. She explained that now the deep investigation phase would begin. Experts would analyze every forged signature. Auditors would review every transaction. Witnesses would be called to testify. Meanwhile, the precautionary measures remained in effect. Mason and Tiffany's accounts remained frozen. They could not sell properties or make large financial moves without judicial authorization. The SUV had already been auctioned, and the money, about $28,000 after deductions, was held in a court account awaiting the resolution of the case. But then the attacks began. Mason started calling other relatives, distant uncles, cousins I barely saw, telling his version of the story. He told them I was a cruel mother who was destroying him out of greed, that he had only asked for help and I was sending him to jail, that I preferred money over my own son. Some relatives called to scold me. They told me how I could do that to Mason, that family forgives everything, that I was a disgrace. Every call was like a stab wound, but it also showed me who those people really were. None asked for my version. None wanted to know the truth. They just judged and condemned me without listening. There were 2 exceptions. My cousin Janet, with whom I had not spoken in years, called me one day. She had heard rumors and wanted to know the truth directly from me. I told her everything in great detail. She cried listening to me. She asked for forgiveness for having been absent so long. She told me she had lived something similar with her brother and understood my pain perfectly. Janet became an unexpected support. She started visiting me often. She helped me with groceries. She accompanied me to appointments with Arthur. She was simply there when I needed to talk. Together with Barbara, they formed a circle of protection around me. They reminded me I was not alone, that there were people who valued me. One afternoon, while Janet and I were having coffee in my kitchen, the doorbell rang. It was a woman I did not know. She introduced herself as a court-appointed social worker. She came to do an evaluation of my situation as part of the legal process. She needed to verify that I was in adequate mental condition to carry out the complaint. I felt offended at first. Were they questioning my sanity? But the social worker, a kind lady, explained it was standard procedure in family fraud cases. Mason's lawyer had suggested I might be confused due to my age, that maybe I suffered from memory problems. It was another dirty tactic to discredit me. The evaluation lasted almost 2 hours. She asked questions about my daily life, my memory, my activities. She asked me to remember dates, to do some simple mental exercises. In the end, the social worker smiled and told me I was perfectly lucid and competent, that my memory was excellent, and clearly I knew exactly what I was doing. Her report would be added to the case file. A small victory, but important. It meant they could not use my age to disqualify my testimony, that my words would have full weight before the judge. Days later, Arthur summoned me urgently to his office. When I arrived, he had a serious expression. He showed me some documents he had just received. It was a countersuit filed by Mason's lawyer. My son was suing me. I could not believe it. The lawsuit alleged that I owed money to Mason, that for years he had spent his own money taking care of me, buying me things, paying my expenses, that the loans he took were to cover my debts that I refused to pay, that he deserved to be compensated for all those years of supporting me. It was so absurd, so full of lies, that it would make me laugh if it weren't so painful. Arthur assured me this lawsuit had no basis. It was a desperate tactic to confuse things, to make it seem like there was a mutual dispute instead of unilateral fraud. But it would not work. The evidence against me was non-existent. The evidence against Mason was overwhelming. However, this meant more time in court, more emotional wear, more money on lawyers. Mason was trying to exhaust me, to make me give up out of fatigue. But I was more determined than ever. If he wanted war, he would have it. While all this occurred in the legal realm, my daily life had become chaos. Banks called me constantly about the debts in my name. Although Arthur had managed to temporarily suspend collections while the case was resolved, my credit score was destroyed. I could not take out even a small loan if I needed it. My name was tarnished. I had to sell some jewelry I had, memories of my husband, to pay the minimum installments on some debts and prevent the situation from worsening. Every piece I sold broke my heart. They were the last gifts my husband had given me before dying, but I had no choice. I needed to survive. One night, while checking my almost empty bank accounts, I broke down. I cried like I had not cried in weeks. I felt defeated, exhausted, completely destroyed. Barbara found me like that, sitting on my kitchen floor, surrounded by papers and receipts, crying uncontrollably. She sat beside me and hugged me. She said nothing at first. She just let me cry. When I finally calmed down, she helped me up, made me tea, and forced me to sit at the table. She looked me straight in the eyes and told me something that changed my perspective. She told me I had already won, that even if the courts had not given their final verdict, I had already triumphed, because I had defended myself, because I had stood up, because I had said no to abuse. That, she told me, was the true victory. The rest was just formality. Her words gave me a respite in the middle of the storm. She was right. Regardless of what happened in court, I had already recovered something invaluable, my dignity. I was no longer a silent victim. I was a woman fighting for what was right. The next day, D.A. Harper called me with important news. The experts had completed the handwriting analysis. The result was conclusive. All signatures on loan documents and contracts had been forged. The margin of error was less than 1%. This was irrefutable scientific evidence that Mason had committed fraud. Furthermore, auditors had tracked every stolen dollar. They had found exactly where the money had gone: luxury purchases, trips, expensive restaurants, a home entertainment system that cost $5,000, designer clothes. They had even paid for Tiffany's birthday party, which cost $3,000. Everything documented, everything provable. D.A. Harper told me that with this evidence, the case was practically won. That if this went to trial, there was no way Mason and Tiffany could escape a conviction. She asked me again if I wanted to consider a deal now that we held all the cards. I asked what kind of deal would be possible now. She explained that given the strength of the evidence, we could demand much more favorable conditions. Immediate return of all money, plus interest, a public apology, community service, probation with supervision, and most importantly, admission of guilt permanently recorded. I thought about it for days. I spoke with Arthur, with Barbara, with Janet. Everyone supported me in whatever decision I made. Finally, I decided I would hear the formal proposal from Mason's lawyer, but I had my own conditions, and I would not negotiate any of them. The negotiation meeting took place in a courthouse conference room. I was sitting next to Arthur. On the other side of the table were Mason, Tiffany, and their lawyer. D.A. Harper was present as official mediator. It was the first time I saw my son face to face since the legal process had started. Mason looked haggard. He had lost weight. He had deep circles under his eyes. Tiffany, on the other hand, looked at me with pure hatred. Her eyes were two daggers aimed at me. Neither of them greeted me. The silence in that room was so dense you could cut it with a knife. Mason's lawyer began to speak. He proposed that his clients would return all documented stolen money, the $67,000 of fraudulent loans, the $12,000 from the savings account, the $4,000 from the diverted rent. In total, $83,000. But he did not mention the $50,000 from the liquidated investment. Arthur immediately pointed out that omission. The lawyer hesitated. He said those $50,000 were a separate issue, that there was ambiguity about whether my husband had wanted that money to go to Mason eventually. It was a blatant lie, and everyone in that room knew it. D.A. Harper intervened firmly. She showed them the investment documents again, my name as sole beneficiary, the forged signatures on the liquidation authorization. There was no ambiguity whatsoever. That was theft, period. The lawyer had to back down and add those $50,000 to the proposal. $133,000 in total, but I had my own demands. Not only did I want the money back, I wanted the interest that money would have generated if it had been in my accounts. I wanted compensation for the damage to my credit. I wanted them to pay the debts they had generated in my name directly, not give the money to me so I would pay them. And I wanted something else. I told them, looking directly at Mason, that I wanted an apology. A real apology, notarized, where they admitted every single thing they had done, every lie, every theft, every forgery, and that apology be a permanent part of the court record. Tiffany exploded. She got up from the chair screaming that I was crazy if I thought she was going to apologize, that she had done nothing wrong, that I was a bitter old woman who could not stand seeing her son happy, that all this was out of envy because they had a better life than mine. D.A. Harper asked her with a firm voice to sit down and shut up. She reminded her she was facing serious criminal charges, and her attitude was not helping at all. Tiffany let herself fall into the chair, but kept glaring at me. Mason finally spoke. It was the first time I heard his voice in weeks. He asked me with a tired tone if I really wanted to destroy him, if after everything we had been through together as mother and son, I could send them to jail without remorse. He was trying to use maternal guilt against me once more. I replied calmly but firmly. I told him it was not me who had destroyed him, that he only destroyed himself the day he decided stealing from me was acceptable, that I was not sending him to jail, his own actions had put him there, that every decision he made had consequences and now he had to face them. I reminded him of everything he had done, not as reproaches, but as facts. The forged signatures, the fraudulent documents, the $50,000 from his dead father's investment, the rent diverted month after month, the credit cards used for luxuries while I ate rice and beans to survive. Everything, one by one. I saw his eyes fill with tears. For a moment, I thought he had finally reached real repentance, but then he spoke again, and I realized his tears were not of remorse, they were of self-pity. He was lamenting being caught, not what he had done. He told me if I insisted on all those conditions, they had no way to pay, that they did not have $133,000, that their accounts were frozen, that they had lost the car, that they were practically on the street, that I was leaving them with nothing. Arthur then took out a document he had prepared. It was a report of Mason and Tiffany's assets. They had a house in their name valued at $200,000. They had savings they had hidden in accounts of Tiffany's relatives. They had small investments. They had valuable belongings. They were not on the street, nor close to being so. Their lawyer reviewed the document, and his expression changed. He realized we had done our homework, that we knew exactly what resources they had. He asked for a 20-minute recess to speak with his clients in private. While we waited, Barbara and Janet, who had come to support me and were waiting outside, entered the room. Barbara brought me water. Janet squeezed my hand. D.A. Harper told me quietly I was doing very well, to stay firm. When Mason, Tiffany, and their lawyer returned, the attitude had changed. The lawyer proposed a new agreement. They would sell the house. With that money, they would pay the $133,000 plus $20,000 additional for interest and damages, a total of $153,000. Also, they would sign the letter of apology with all the details I had requested. In exchange, I would drop the criminal charges. They would accept probation for 5 years, during which they could not approach me or contact me in any way. If they violated any term of the agreement, they would automatically face full criminal charges without possibility of a new deal. Arthur looked at me, awaiting my answer. I asked for a moment to think. I stepped out of the room with him, and we spoke in the hallway. He explained it was a very favorable agreement, that I would recover more money than I had lost, that they would have probation records, which was no small thing, that I would have legal protection against any future approach. But he also warned me that if I rejected this and the case went to trial, although we would probably win, the process would last at least another year, and there was no guarantee Mason and Tiffany would have money after that time to pay. They could declare bankruptcy, they could hide assets. Trial was a gamble. I thought about everything that had happened, about the sleepless nights, about the constant pain, about the betrayal. I also thought about what I wanted for my future. Did I want to remain tied to this conflict for another year? Or did I want to close this chapter and start rebuilding my life? I returned to the room and gave my answer. I accepted the agreement with one additional non-negotiable condition. I wanted Mason and Tiffany to attend mandatory therapy during the entire probation period. Individual therapy for each and family therapy together. I wanted them to face what they had done, not just legally, but also emotionally. The lawyer looked at his clients. Mason nodded wearily. Tiffany seemed furious, but also nodded. They knew they had no other choice. The evidence against them was too strong. If this went to trial, they faced years in prison. This agreement, although tough, was their best exit. D.A. Harper began drafting the formal terms of the agreement. We all waited in silence while she wrote every clause, every condition, every consequence for non-compliance. The final document had 7 pages of specific details. There was no ambiguity whatsoever. Everything was perfectly clear. When the document was ready, D.A. Harper read it aloud completely. Every party listened in silence. Then she asked us to sign. First I signed, with a trembling but determined hand. Then Arthur, as my representative. Then Mason, with his head down, avoiding my gaze. Tiffany signed with such force she almost broke the paper. Their lawyer signed last. D.A. Harper notarized the document and gave copies to each party. She explained that now would come the compliance phase. Mason and Tiffany had 60 days to sell the house and gather the money. During that time, they would remain under the existing precautionary measures. I left that room feeling strange. It was not exactly happiness I felt. It was rather relief, mixed with deep sadness. I had won legally, but I had lost my son in the process. Or maybe I had lost him a long time ago and was just realizing it. Barbara and Janet hugged me in the courthouse hallway. They congratulated me on my courage. Arthur shook my hand and told me I should be proud of myself. D.A. Harper said goodbye with words of encouragement, telling me she would be monitoring compliance with the agreement personally. The following 60 days were a torture of waiting. Every morning I woke up wondering if Mason and Tiffany would really comply, if they would find some way to escape, if they would try some last-minute legal trick. Arthur reassured me constantly, reminding me the agreement was legally binding and any breach would result in immediate criminal charges. At 3 weeks, Arthur informed me Mason's house had been put up for sale. The price was $200,000, a fair market price. I felt strange knowing my son was losing his house because of his own actions. Part of me, that maternal part that never dies completely, felt pity. But the rational part knew this was a direct consequence of his decisions. During that time, I began receiving anonymous messages, text messages from unknown numbers, calling me a monster, bad mother, heartless witch. I knew immediately they came from Tiffany or friends of theirs. They told me my grandchildren hated me, that they would never forgive me, that I had destroyed a family for money. Every message hurt, but they no longer broke me. I had learned that people who really knew me knew the truth. Others could think whatever they wanted. I changed my phone number and blocked all possible forms of unauthorized contact. Barbara organized a small gathering at her house with some neighborhood ladies who supported me. It was comforting to hear their stories, to realize I was not alone. Dorothy, the lady who had shared her experience with me weeks ago, told me she had finally called Arthur. She was initiating her own legal process against her son. She thanked me for giving her the courage to defend herself. In the 5th week, Arthur called me with good news. Mason's house had a serious buyer. The offer was $195,000. After paying the mortgage they still owed and closing costs, approximately $160,000 clear would remain, more than enough to meet the agreement of $153,000. The day the house sale closed, Arthur went personally to oversee the transfer of funds. The money was deposited into a special court account. From there, it was distributed as agreed. First, all debts in my name were paid. The fraudulent loans were liquidated completely. The credit cards were left at zero. My name was cleared from all debtor databases. Then, the rest of the money was transferred to my bank account, $105,000. It was more money than I had lost, thanks to interest and compensation. When I saw that balance in my account, I started crying. They were not tears of joy exactly. They were tears of closure, of ending a nightmare. But the money was not the most important thing I had recovered. The most valuable thing was my dignity, my voice, my right to defend myself. Those things were priceless. A week later, I received a certified envelope. Inside was the letter of apology Mason and Tiffany had signed before a notary. I read it only once. It was mechanical, cold, clearly written by their lawyer, but it was there. Every fraudulent act admitted, every lie recognized, every theft confessed. On official paper, with their signatures, permanent in judicial records, I stored that letter in a box, along with all the case documents. I did not read it again. I did not need to. Its existence was enough. Arthur informed me Mason and Tiffany had started the mandatory therapy sessions. The assigned therapist would send monthly reports to the court confirming their attendance and participation. If they missed a single session without valid medical justification, they would violate the terms of the agreement. He also explained the restraining order was active. Mason and Tiffany could not come within 500 meters of me. They could not call me, write to me, contact me in any way. If they did, they would be arrested immediately. This protection gave me peace of mind. I knew I was safe. With the recovered money, I made some important decisions. First, I paid Arthur's fees completely. He had worked tirelessly for me and deserved every penny. Second, I gave a generous gift to Barbara as thanks for all her support. She tried to refuse it, but I insisted. Without her, I do not know if I would have had the strength to keep going. Then, I took a decision that had been hovering over me for weeks. I sold the condo I rented out. I no longer wanted to have properties to manage. I no longer wanted to worry about tenants or maintenance. I wanted to simplify my life. The condo sold for $75,000, money I invested safely in a fund that gave me guaranteed monthly interest. With part of the recovered money and the condo money, I bought a smaller house in a quiet neighborhood on the other side of the city, far from where Mason lived, far from painful memories. A new place for a new beginning. The house had 2 bedrooms, a small garden, and lots of natural light. It was perfect for me. Barbara moved to a house near mine. She said she was not going to leave me alone in a new area. Janet also started visiting me regularly. The 3 of us became inseparable. We created our own chosen family, a family based on respect, genuine affection, and mutual support. I began attending a support group for victims of family financial abuse. It was a small group that met every week at a community center. There I met other people who had gone through similar situations. Listening to their stories helped me process my own pain, and sharing my story helped others feel less alone. One woman in the group, a 70-year-old lady named Alice, told me her daughter had stolen her pension for 5 years. She never reported her. She lived with that burden of resentment and pain every day. I suggested she speak with Arthur. I gave her his number. I do not know if she did, but I planted a seed. Sometimes that is all we can do. As weeks passed, I started sleeping better. The nightmares diminished. The constant knot in my stomach began to loosen. I started enjoying small things. Drinking coffee in my garden in the mornings, reading books I had left abandoned, cooking meals I liked without worrying about stretching every dollar. One afternoon, while watering the plants in my new garden, I realized something important. I realized I was smiling. A genuine smile, not forced. I had not smiled like that in months. It was a simple moment, but profound. It showed me I was healing, that life after betrayal was possible. 3 months after the agreement, D.A. Harper called to inform me. Mason and Tiffany had complied with all terms so far. They attended therapies. They had not violated the restraining order. They had paid all agreed money. The case was officially closed from a judicial standpoint. She asked me how I felt. I told her the truth. I felt free. I felt as if I had recovered my life. I felt proud to have defended myself. I felt sad about how everything ended, but at peace with my decisions. 6 months after the entire legal process concluded, my life had found a completely new rhythm. I woke up every morning in my small but cozy house, without the weight of anxiety that had crushed me for so long. The sun came through the windows, illuminating every corner, as if the light itself wanted to remind me I had left the darkness behind. I had started doing things I never had time to do when I was constantly worried about money or pleasing my son. I enrolled in a painting workshop for seniors at the community center. I discovered I had a certain knack for landscapes. Nothing professional, but it gave me peace and joy. Every brushstroke was therapeutic. Barbara, Janet, and I had formed a group we jokingly called the Invincibles. We met twice a week to have coffee, share meals, simply enjoy each other's company. They had become the sisters I always wanted to have, in the family I chose consciously. The support group for victims of family financial abuse had grown. Now we were almost 20 people. I had become a sort of unofficial leader. I shared my story with new members. I gave them hope that it was possible to defend oneself and recover. Several of them had contacted Arthur and were initiating their own legal processes. One afternoon, while preparing the house for one of our group meetings, the doorbell rang. I opened the door and froze. It was Mason. He was standing in my entryway, with wrinkled clothes, unshaven beard, and red eyes. My first instinct was to slam the door in his face and call the police. He was violating the restraining order. But something in his expression stopped me. It was not the arrogance of before. It was not the coldness. It was something different. He seemed genuinely shattered. He raised his hands in a sign of peace and asked me with a broken voice to please give him 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes to talk. I looked toward the street. His car was parked far away, probably so as not to technically violate the distance limit of the order. I hesitated. Every cell in my body shouted at me to close that door. But there was a part of me, that maternal part that never dies completely, that needed to hear what he had to say. I told him to stay on the porch, not to enter my house. I stood in the doorway, ready to close it at any moment. Mason nodded and began. His voice trembled. Tears began rolling down his cheeks as he spoke. He told me mandatory therapy had been the worst and best thing that had happened to him. That for months he had been in denial, blaming me, blaming the system, blaming everyone but himself. But his therapist did not allow those excuses. She forced him to look directly at what he had done, to face the truth of his actions. He told me Tiffany and he had separated, that she never accepted any responsibility and just blamed him for everything. That she had left with another man as soon as the money ran out, that finally he had seen who that woman really was. A manipulator who had used him as much as he had used me. Mason told me something that broke my heart again. He told me his children, my grandchildren, had asked him why they didn't see Grandma anymore, that he didn't know how to answer them, that finally he had told them the truth, adapted for their age. That Dad had done very bad things to Grandma and she had to protect herself. That the children cried and asked him if they could see me someday. Tears ran down my face as I listened to him. The mention of my grandchildren hurt deeply. I loved them so much, but I knew I could not have them in my life if that meant allowing Mason to come close again, without real consequences. Mason continued speaking. He told me he did not expect me to forgive him, that he understood if I never wanted to see him again. But he needed me to know something important, that finally, after months of therapy, he understood the magnitude of what he had done to me, that there was no justification, that he had destroyed the most important relationship of his life out of greed and selfishness. He asked for my forgiveness, not the mechanical forgiveness of the notarized letter, a real forgiveness, full of pain and genuine regret. He told me he would spend the rest of his life trying to be a better person, that he was working 2 jobs to rebuild his life from scratch, that he attended therapy even though it was no longer mandatory, that he was trying to teach his children the value of honest work and respect for others. I looked him in the eyes. I saw my son there, not the criminal who had robbed me, but the boy I had raised. But I also saw a man who had made terrible decisions and now carried the consequences. I saw genuine pain, but I also saw that pain was necessary. It was part of his process of real change. I told him with a firm voice but not cruel that I appreciated his words, that I could see he was trying to change, but that I needed him to understand something fundamental. Forgiveness did not mean forgetting. It did not mean returning to the relationship we had before. That relationship died the day he decided to betray me. There was no way to resurrect it. I told him that maybe, with a lot of time, a lot of work, and a lot of consistency on his part, we could eventually have some type of cordial relationship. But that would take years, not months. That he would have to demonstrate with actions, not words, that he had really changed. And that in the meantime, he needed to respect my space and my peace. Mason nodded while crying. He told me he understood, that he would respect my terms, that he would not come close again without my permission. He gave me an envelope he carried in his hand. He told me inside were photos of the children and letters they had written for me. That he did not expect an answer, but wanted me to know they missed me and loved me. I took the envelope with trembling hands. I told him to leave, that if he really wanted to demonstrate change, start by respecting the restraining order that was still in effect. He nodded, turned around, and walked toward his car. I watched him walk away and close the door. I sat in my living room, hugging that envelope for a long while. Finally, I opened it. There were 3 photos of my grandchildren smiling. They had grown so much in these months. And there were 2 letters written in childish handwriting. Grandma, I miss you. When am I going to see you? I love you very much. I cried reading those simple but so profound words. Barbara arrived shortly after for our group meeting and found me crying on the sofa. I told her what had happened. She hugged me and let me cry. She told me it was okay to feel pain, that it was okay to miss my son and my grandchildren. That was part of being human. But it was also okay to keep my boundaries, that protecting myself did not make me a bad person. That night, at the support group meeting, I shared what had happened. Mason's visit, his apologies, my contradictory feelings. The group listened without judging. Several shared similar experiences. One lady told me something that stuck with me. Forgiveness is for you, not for him. But forgiveness does not require reconciliation. You can forgive and still keep distance. The 2 things can coexist. In the following weeks, I thought a lot about those words. I decided to write a letter to Mason. I did not send it. I wrote it for myself. In it, I expressed everything I felt. The pain, the betrayal, the love that still existed underneath all that, the hope that he really changed. At the end of the letter, I wrote something liberating. I forgive you, not because what you did is okay, but because I need to let go of this weight. But forgiving you does not mean I will trust you again, that you have to earn. I kept that letter in my private drawer. I never sent it because it was not for him. It was my personal declaration of freedom. It was closing that chapter definitely on my own terms. The following months were of deep reconstruction. I continued with my painting classes. I started doing volunteer work at a soup kitchen. I used part of the recovered money to make some improvements to my house, a bigger garden, new paint, comfortable furniture. I turned my space into a true home, not just a house. I also started giving occasional talks at community centers about financial abuse in the elderly. I shared my story, not to generate pity, but to educate and empower. Many people approached afterward thanking me for giving them the courage to defend themselves from similar situations. A year after the legal agreement, D.A. Harper called to inform me Mason's probation period was about to end. She asked if I wanted to renew the restraining order or let it expire. I thought carefully about my answer. I decided to let it expire, but with a clear registered warning. Any unwanted contact would result in a new immediate order. I felt secure in that decision. I no longer feared Mason. I had recovered my power. If he chose to respect me, fine. If not, I knew exactly how to protect myself. Today, as I write this last page of my story, I sit in my garden with a cup of hot coffee. The sun shines softly. I hear birds singing. Barbara will come in an hour for lunch. Janet will stop by in the afternoon. I have a painting class tomorrow. I have my support group on Thursday. My life is simple now. I have no extravagant luxuries, but I have peace. I have dignity. I have control over my own existence. I have people who value me genuinely, not for what I can give them, but for who I am. Do I miss Mason? Yes. I miss the son he could have been. I miss my grandchildren terribly, but I do not miss the abuse. I do not miss feeling used. I do not miss living with constant fear and anxiety. And never, never will I allow anyone to make me feel that way again. If my story serves anyone, I want it to be this. Family love is no excuse for abuse. Being a mother does not mean being a bottomless bank. Defending yourself does not make you a bad person. Setting boundaries is an act of self-love, not selfishness. I learned that true family is not just blood. It is the one you choose. It is the one that respects you. It is the one that celebrates your victories and holds you in your falls without expecting anything in return. I learned it is never too late to defend yourself, that no matter your age, your history, or how long you have endured abuse, always, always you have the right to protect yourself and seek justice. I learned that a child's betrayal is one of the deepest pains that exists, but that pain does not define you. That you can survive it, that you can rebuild yourself, that you can find happiness again. And I learned, finally, that I am stronger than I ever imagined. That scared woman who received that call from the bank over a year ago no longer exists. In her place is a woman who knows her worth. A woman who does not fear defending what is right. A woman at peace with herself. I finish my coffee and smile. I have 25 years of life ahead, God willing. And I plan to live them on my own terms, surrounded by true love, building the life I deserve. This is my story. The story of how my son tried to destroy me, but instead taught me to be unbreakable. The story of how the worst moment of my life became my greatest transformation. And if someone is reading this, living a similar situation, I want you to know something. You can do it too. You also deserve to defend yourself. You also deserve to live without abuse. Take that first step. Seek help. Talk to someone you trust. Contact a lawyer. File that report. It will be hard. It will be painful. There will be days when you will want to give up. But on the other side of that pain is freedom. Is your recovered dignity. Is a life in peace. And that, believe me, is worth every tear, every difficult moment, every brave decision. Today I close this chapter definitely, not with bitterness, but with gratitude. Gratitude for having found the strength I did not know I had. Gratitude for the people who supported me unconditionally. Gratitude for a second chance to live the life I really deserve. My name is Margaret Sullivan. I am 65 years old. And finally, after everything, I am free.